Session 1, the conclusion was reached: if God be real, and we believe what God wants us to believe, it stands to reason that God will be kindly inclined towards us. If God be real, but we do not believe what God wants us to believe, it stands to reason that God will not be kindly inclined towards us. If God be real, logic says, should we not seek to know what it is that He wants us to believe? In Session 2, we reached the conclusion that God gave us a source for that answer. In Session 3, we found that mankind was given a test. It was graded on a pass-fail basis, and mankind failed. God is indeed real, and in His mercy did not wish that punishment be the last word. We learned that according to the Bible, you and I are sinners. It's not that we're necessarily sinners by choice, it's just that we're born that way. And we learned that God has provided a retest. In this session leading up to the terms of the retest, I'm going to give a synopsis of God's interaction with mankind since the original plunge into sin. After the failed test, the man and the woman were cast out of their original home. They were sentenced to hard labor. Before long, the first kids took sibling rivalry to the extreme, and one brother murdered the other. Also, as a consequence of the incident with the bad fruit, a second effect came into play. The adversaries' unholy team members were set loose upon the surface of planet Earth. And they interacted with Adam and Eve's granddaughters and great-granddaughters, etc., and produced a race of unholy crossbreeds. According to Genesis, men and women were designed to have lifespans that would match the life of the sun. Disobedience with the forbidden fruit reduced their lifespans to mere centuries, and most lived to close to 1,000 years. Having centuries to learn the limits of their abilities, men and women learned very well how to push the limits way beyond what God ever intended. Add to that the increasing numbers of unholy crossbreeds and the rapid decay of the gene pool, sin ruled the earth. God was way beyond anger. He had given mankind plenty of rope, and with it, they formed their own noose. God was ready to chuck it all, but it is His nature to show compassion. God allowed 8 folks to take a menagerie aboard an escape vessel, and then used massive earthquakes, volcanoes, and water to recreate the entire surface and operation of the planet. On the restructured planet, conditions were harsh. The planet no longer worked in harmony with mankind. The planet itself was hostile towards men and women. Several generations later, a few reacted towards this hostility with grace, but most returned hostility for hostility. Even with lifespans again reduced, this time to less than a single century, mankind degenerated into perversities of the worst kinds. Why that is staggers the imagination. Rather than once again take out vengeance on the creation, God chose to move towards an elegant solution in restoring mankind to the purpose for which men and women were first created. Since most were either degenerate in the extreme or allied against him, or both, God decided to take a single man and out of him create a nation of people through which he would bring a solution. The man's name was Abram. Exactly how God chose this man and how God communicated in such a way that Abraham could not miss the message is not disclosed. But we are told that God gave Abram a message and that the man believed what he was told. I think that tells us something very relevant about the creator of the universe. God desires to be taken seriously. God desires to be trusted. Abram trusted God. Abram, now known as Abraham, received the fulfillment of God's promise, a son, Isaac. Isaac had twins, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, later known as Israel, also had faith in God, and Jacob was prolific. With his 4 wives, he had 12 sons and an undisclosed number of daughters. A fortuitous series of events led to he and his family moving to Egypt, where over a number of generations, his descendants grew to a community of families large enough to inhabit the land promised to Abraham. The exit from Egypt and the rest of the histories contained in Genesis makes for inspiring reading. Allow me to suggest Genesis as excellent reading material. The land promised to Abraham was at that time inhabited by descendants of the unholy crossbreeds. How and why the crossbreeds were not eliminated in the planetary destruction is not directly revealed. But God apparently wanted Abraham's seed to be free from contamination. So he instructed the 12 tribes of Israel to completely eradicate those who then inhabited the Promised Land. Unfortunately, some of the children of Israel were not very good at following instructions, and the rest, as they say, is history. Israel took possession of the promised land and sometimes paid attention to God's directions, and sometimes not. Skirmishes with neighbors who could not care less about the creator of the universe were frequent, sometimes devastating, and always annoying. Not understanding that their lack of peace might have been of their own doing, Israel thought they would fare better under a new form of government similar to that of their neighbors. God reluctantly gave them a king. The first one didn't meet the standard that God was looking for. But then God's attention came to a man after his own heart, David, son of Jesse, from the tribe of Judah. A relative peace was achieved, but it didn't last long. Even though chosen by God to drive the vehicle to the solution for sin, too many of the children of Israel apparently didn't quite get the message. Wars and rumors of wars, decadence, death, and destruction fills the pages of the history of the nation of Israel. But God keeps his promises. He promised the children of Israel a land that they can call their own. And he promised that if they humbled themselves and if they turned to him in their times of trouble, he would hear their cry and he would heal their land. Time and time again, they forgot the God of their fathers. But time and time again, someone was there to remind them who he is. And time again, God rescued them from their enemies. As the centuries flowed past, the nation fell more and more into moral decay. One last time, God let them feel the whip of the enemy. They were carried away to captivity by the ancient Chaldeans and made slaves in Babylon. But one more time, before the solution was to appear on the scene, God allowed Israel to return to the land promised to Abraham. Sin held sway throughout all history, but God was about to defeat the power of sin. For 400 years after the return from Babylon, Israel got their daily bread from the fruit of the land. But they always owed a part of that fruit in oppressive taxes to foreign empires. Despite that, hope filled the hearts of the children of Israel. The promise to Abraham, the promise to Jacob, the promise to David, and the promise to all the children of Israel was foremost in the minds of all. All Israel waited for God to rescue them. All Israel waited for a Messiah. I'm going to leave you here. I said that we're all sinners. I said that God did not want the fruit of our sin to be the final word. I said that God has a way to restore humanity to the position that was intended at the beginning of time. In session 5, I'm going to tell you how you can personally take possession of the promise that Israel anticipated nearly 2,050 years ago. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in session 5.